I'm Peter Levine, the director of the Defense Management Institute, and we're here today as a part of a planned series of interviews of individuals who have made significant contributions to improving the management of the Department of Defense. Today, I'm speaking with the Honorable Deborah Lee James, who served as the 23rd Secretary of the Air Force from 2013 to 2017 and currently serves as the chair of the Defense Business Board. In the course of her illustrious career, Secretary James has also held key positions on Capitol Hill, in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, with the Business Executives for National Security, and in the private sector.
Well, actually, my second job was with the House Armed Services Committee. And I remember we had 2 professional staff positions that were held by women in those days, and then I was the third. I also remember that I became pregnant twice while working as a staff member on the House Armed Services Committee. They did not have any sort of a policy because no one had ever had a baby before on the committee staff, so they had to make up a policy for me, and I suspect that policy has changed quite a bit over the years. But you're right, I was one of the very few in those days. And you know, there may have been hurdles, I'm sure there were, but to be honest, I never felt that way. Maybe I just didn't perceive it that way. I always felt more self-reflective because I was so young. I've always been, but note to self, the age thing does catch up with you eventually. But in those days, I was always 15, even 20 years younger than the people that I was working with. So I was junior to them by far. And as you know, when you're on a committee staff, particularly I leapfrogged right onto a major committee staff, you're questioning and asking, you know, for information and sometimes challenging 4-star generals and very senior people. And as a young person, it's not that easy to do. So somehow you have to, but you have to do it because that's your job, and you have to hopefully do it with some finesse and knowing your facts and doing it in a way that is not stick it in your eye, but rather is inquiring and just trying to get to the bottom of whatever the situation is. Well, for the time that you have available to you, is make clear what some of these agenda items are or what some of these policy changes are, to instantiate them in writing, in policy, in regulation, if at all possible. I mentioned the important partnership with the military, the uniformed military, so to have the uniformed military and the career civil servants on board, if at all possible, is crucial because the likelihood is there that it will remain. And then for whatever time you're privileged to have, you've got to follow up, follow up, follow up. So I've seen over and over again in business and in government, people will issue an order or they'll issue a memo and then they'll assume it's done with not too much follow-up required. My experience is the exact opposite. If you're trying to really change something more than just an inch this way or that way, if it's more than a tweak, you have got to relentlessly communicate it. You've got to relentlessly follow up, call the meetings, let me see the metrics, let me see how we prove that we're making progress, et cetera, et cetera. And so I did that regularly while I was secretary. So the way you do it is, the way we did it at least was, there were at least 2 parts. There was the part 1, which would be convening the various offices, and you know, you either peanut butter spread the thing and say everybody's going to have to come up with 10% savings or whatever the percentage is, come back and tell us how. And then the how becomes a judgment call. Is that asking too much? Is that going to hurt the war fighting too much? Is that going to cross some red line? So that would be one way of doing it. The other way is I'll call the offensive strategy. We came up with various programs which we hoped would save money. So the answer is not really, but it's the only mechanism that we seem to have. So often when you just do an efficiency drill and you have to cut X%, you end up eliminating spaces that aren't filled anyway with human beings. There's various tricks that are played to try to hit this number, to try to hit the bogey. We're so big now that to do truly a zero-based review and a look at each individual position and so on, it's almost too much. It's almost too much. I do know that, for example, the Army at one point brought in a management company or a consultancy company like a McKinsey, who mapped out for them how to eliminate layers of people and make sure that if you've got this title, you're overseeing at least so many people. I mean, they gave them a framework, which I've seen that framework before from my SAIC days, frameworks like it. I'm not sure, it maybe makes perfect sense, but I'm not sure that it ever got implemented, because in order to make such substantial changes, you've got to have the authority to literally do major layoffs and this, that, and the other, which of course is very difficult in the government. So it's not a good way to do it. The way that we do it is really not a good way to do it. It's not the way a business would do it. And yet we've gotten so big, I'm not sure how we would conduct a zero-based review. Well, you have to get along with them. That's point one. Even though it's hard sometimes, even though it seems like with every passing decade, the political drama increases and you feel personally attacked at times when you're testifying. But you can't lose your cool. You can't, you must get along, because, as you point out, they have so much more power and authority than you do, and the situation can become even worse. So I have tried to have always the philosophy, as I've been in the executive branch, I can only do the best that I can do. And my job is to try to do the best for the Air Force, for the Department of Defense, for the country. My job is to use my brains and my abilities to put forth the best possible approach, give the facts, give the rationale, go the extra, mile by doing the personal calls and, the extra communicating that is really very, very necessary. I try to think through the politics. Like you say, having been on the other side, you can almost imagine what's going to go wrong with some of these proposals. So if you can have that in mind and marry up good politics with good policy, now there you've really got something. That's not always easy to do. But one of the areas that, to give an example, during my tenure, not having enough money for everything, we attempted to retire the A-10, first the entire fleet, then just maybe part of the fleet, and then a few aircraft, and we just had a brick wall year after year after year. Now, we're probably 10 years into this effort, and they have, Congress has now started to allow the A-10s to retire. But of course, 10 years into the effort, we have other aircraft that can now be put in place of those A-10s, because here's where the politics, of course, comes in. No congressman and no senator wants to bet on the come that someday they'll get replacement aircraft. If they're going to let the aircraft of today go, they want right now, right away, something similar to replace it, because it's a matter of jobs. I understand that. Back in those days, it was still the right decision to retire it, given everything I understood to be the case. We didn't have those extra planes. We didn't have as many F-35s, for example, to put into the inventory. So the fact that we do today, that's an example of now we can exercise good politics with good policy and begin to get things done.